The fact that there was no trace of him anywhere only deepened her sense of unease. After checking into the hotel and locking herself in her room, Muna sat on the bed, her phone in her hand. She considered texting Dami, but she knew her friend would only worry. Instead, she scrolled through her contacts until she found Chidi's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she even say if he picked up? Should she confront him, demand to know who he really was? Or should she wait and see if Lara could uncover anything more about him? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. Her heart leaped into her throat when she saw it was from Sadiq. "I'm worried about you, Muna. You've been distant. Let's talk." Muna's hands trembled as she stared at the message. The calm, seemingly caring tone of his text only made her more uneasy. She knew better now. This wasn't concern, it was control. She quickly blocked his number, a small but necessary step to protect herself. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. Sadiq was resourceful, and if he was truly obsessed with her, he would find other ways to get to her. After blocking Sadiq, she forced herself to focus. She couldn't keep reacting out of fear. She needed to be proactive, to regain control of her life. Tomorrow, she would file the police report, as Lara suggested. It might not stop Sadiq, but it would create a paper trail, something to protect her if things escalated. That night, sleep eluded her once again. Every creak of the hotel room made her jump, every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even though she was certain she was alone. By the time morning came, Muna felt exhausted, both physically and mentally. But she knew she had to keep moving forward, to keep digging until she uncovered the truth about Sadiq and Chidi. After a quick breakfast at the hotel, Muna drove to the police station. Filing the report was nerve-wracking, but the officers she spoke to were understanding and professional. They took down her information, listened to her concerns, and promised to keep an eye on the situation. Leaving the station, Muna felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something, an official step toward protecting herself. But she knew that filing the report was just the beginning. Later that day, as Muna was sitting in a coffee shop near her hotel, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. Her heart raced as she answered, hoping it was Lara with more information. "Hello. Muna, it's me, Chidi." Muna froze, her pulse quickening. "Chidi, how did you get this number?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "I'm sorry, Muna. I didn't mean to scare you. I need to talk to you. It's important." Every instinct in Muna screamed at her to hang up, to protect herself. But there was something in Chidi's voice, an urgency that made her hesitate. "What do you want, Chidi?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I can't explain everything over the phone," he said, his tone pleading. "But you need to know that I'm trying to help you. Sadiq is dangerous, more than you realize. Please, can we meet? I'll explain everything." Muna's mind raced, torn between fear and curiosity. She didn't know if she could trust him, especially after Lara's warnings. But she also couldn't deny the gnawing need for answers. "Where?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll text you the address," Chidi replied. "It's a public place, I promise. I just need a few minutes of your time." Muna hesitated for a long moment before giving a reluctant nod. "Fine. But if I feel unsafe, I'm leaving. And if this is a trap..." "It's not a trap," Chidi cut in, his voice earnest. "I swear, Muna. I'm trying to protect you." With that, the call ended, and a moment later, a text came through with an address, a small cafe in a busy part of town. Muna stared at the message, her mind racing. She had a choice to make: confront the unknown and potentially learn the truth about Chidi and Sadiq, or walk away and continue living in fear, never knowing what was really going on. In the end, the need for answers won out. Muna grabbed her bag, checked her reflection in the mirror to make sure she looked calm, and then left the hotel. She knew the risks, but she couldn't keep running from the shadows. It was time to face the unknown head-on. The drive to the cafe felt longer than it should have. Every stoplight, every car that pulled up beside her, made Muna's pulse quicken with anxiety. She couldn't help but check her rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see Sadiq's car following her. But the roads were busy with the usual afternoon traffic, and no one seemed to be paying her any particular attention. When she finally arrived at the cafe, it was bustling with people, just as Chidi had promised. The warm glow of the afternoon sun filtered through the large windows, casting soft light over the tables inside. Muna hesitated for a moment, her hand on the door, before pushing it open and stepping inside. The cafe's familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and pastries wrapped around her, offering a brief, comforting reprieve from the turmoil in her mind. She scanned the room, looking for Chidi. He was seated at a table near the back, away from the large windows but still in plain view of the bustling activity around them. He looked up as she entered, their eyes meeting across the room. His expression was tense, but there was a hint of relief as well, as if he hadn't been sure she would actually show up. Muna approached the table cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. Chidi stood up as she neared, pulling out a chair for her. "Thanks for coming, Muna," he said, his voice low and sincere. She nodded curtly and sat down, keeping her distance from him. "You said you had something to explain." Chidi sat down across from her, his hands clasped together on the table. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with how to begin. "I know you have every reason not to trust me," he finally said. "Especially after everything that's happened. But I need you to understand that I've been trying to protect you from the start." Muna's eyes narrowed. "Protect me? From what, exactly? Who are you, Chidi? Because according to what I've learned, you don't even exist." Chidi flinched at her words, but he nodded, as if he had been expecting this reaction. "That's because Chidi isn't my real name. I've been going by an alias to keep a low profile." Muna's pulse quickened. "Why? What are you hiding?" He looked down at his hands for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "I'm a private investigator, Muna. I was hired to look into Sadiq Sirla." Muna's breath caught in her throat. "A private investigator? Who hired you?" "That's complicated," Chidi said, hesitating. "I was originally hired by someone who had concerns about Sadiq's behavior, one of his former business partners who noticed some red flags. But as I dug deeper, I found that Sadiq has a history of manipulation and stalking, particularly toward women he becomes fixated on. When I saw him with you that night at the restaurant, I knew I had to get closer to keep an eye on you." Muna's mind spun as she tried to process this new information. "So, you've been following me?" "I've been watching Sadiq," Chidi corrected. "But yes, that meant keeping an eye on you as well. I needed to make sure you were safe." A surge of anger flared in Muna's chest. "And you didn't think to tell me any of this? You just let me go on thinking you were some random guy who happened to be around when things got weird." "I didn't want to scare you," Chidi said earnestly. "And I didn't know how deep Sadiq's obsession had gone. I thought if I kept my distance and just watched, I could protect you without drawing too much attention. But things escalated faster than I anticipated." Muna shook her head, still trying to wrap her mind around everything. "Why should I believe you? For all I know, this is just another lie." Chidi leaned forward, his expression imploring. "I get it, Muna. I wouldn't trust me either if I were in your shoes. But think about it, have I ever done anything to harm you? Every time something went wrong with Sadiq, I was there to make sure you were okay. I've been trying to keep you safe from the start." Muna stared at him, her thoughts a tangled mess of doubt and fear. She wanted to believe him, but the situation was too surreal, too twisted to fully grasp. "Then why didn't you tell me about Sadiq sooner?" she asked, her voice trembling. "If you knew he was dangerous, why let me get involved with him in the first place?" Chidi sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I didn't expect him to escalate things with you so quickly. He usually plays a longer game, grooming his victims over time. When I saw how fast he was moving, I knew something was different with you. That's when I decided to approach you directly, but by then, it was too late. He was already watching you closely, and I couldn't risk exposing myself without putting you in more danger." Muna swallowed hard, her fear mixing with frustration. "So what now? What am I supposed to do with all of this?" Chidi looked around the cafe, as if ensuring they weren't being overheard, before lowering his voice even further. "I have a plan to expose Sadiq, to gather enough evidence to put him away for good. But I need your help, Muna." Muna shook her head, fear and anger warring within her. "You want me to help you? After everything? I don't even know who you really are." Chidi's gaze softened, and for the first time, Muna saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I know I've given you every reason to doubt me, but I swear everything I've done has been to keep you safe. If we don't act now, Sadiq will only tighten his grip on you. Please, Muna, trust me just this once." Muna's mind raced as she considered his words. Every instinct told her to run, to get as far away from this tangled web as possible. But then she thought of Sadiq, the way he had inserted himself into her life, the way he had slowly taken control. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't keep living in fear. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with resignation. Chidi looked relieved, but there was a steely determination in his eyes. "First, we need to gather more evidence of his behavior. Conversations, threats, anything that shows his true nature. We'll need to be careful. Sadiq can't know that we're onto him." Muna nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling over her. "And then what?" "Then we take it to the police," Chidi said. "With enough evidence, they'll have no choice but to act. But we need to be smart about this, Muna. Sadiq is dangerous, and he won't go down without a fight." Muna swallowed hard, her fear mingling with a newfound resolve. She had spent too long running, too long hiding from the truth. If she wanted to take back control of her life, she would have to face the darkness head-on. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do it. But you'd better be telling me the truth, Chidi. Because if you're lying, I'll make sure you regret it." Chidi nodded, his expression grave. "I understand. I won't let you down, Muna." As they stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the noise of the city rushed in around them. People bustled along the sidewalks, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface of Muna's life. She walked beside Chidi, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had just agreed to. She felt a gnawing unease in the pit of her stomach, but there was also a newfound sense of purpose. For too long, she had been a passive participant in the chaos that had unfolded around her. First, with Sadiq's increasingly erratic behavior, and then with the unsettling revelations about Chidi's true identity. But now, she was taking control. She had a plan, however dangerous, and a sense of determination that had been missing before. As they reached her car, Chidi paused, his expression serious. "We need to be very careful from this point on," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was watching them. "Sadiq is smart. He'll be watching your every move, looking for any sign that you're onto him." Muna nodded, her hands tightening around her bag. "I understand. But what exactly do you need me to do?" Chidi leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I'm going to wire you with a recording device. It's small, discreet, you won't even know it's there. The goal is to get him to incriminate himself, To say something that will prove his intentions toward you are dangerous. Muna's heart raced at the thought. The idea of confronting Sadiq, of potentially provoking him, filled her with dread. But she knew there was no other way. If they didn't gather concrete evidence, Sadiq could continue his manipulations unchecked. "And what about you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "What will you be doing?" "I'll be close by," Chidi reassured her. "I'll follow you from a distance, ready to step in if things go south. But we need to be subtle. Sadiq can't suspect that I'm involved. If he does, he'll shut down completely, and we'll lose our chance." Muna exhaled slowly, trying to steady her nerves. "When do we start?" "Tonight," Chidi said firmly. "Go back to the hotel, act normal. I'll come by later with the recording device, and we'll go over the plan in more detail. We don't have much time. Sadiq is getting more aggressive, and we need to act before he does something we can't reverse." Muna nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "Okay. I'll be ready." With that, Chidi gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're stronger than you think, Muna. We'll get through this." She didn't respond, simply watching as he turned and walked away, blending into the crowd. For a moment, she stood there, trying to gather her thoughts. The world around her seemed so ordinary, people chatting, cars honking, life moving forward as if nothing was amiss. But she knew better. Beneath the surface, something dark and twisted was lurking, and she was about to dive headfirst into it. The drive back to the hotel was a blur. Muna's mind was a whirlwind of fear, doubt, and determination. She replayed Chidi's words over and over, trying to brace herself for what was to come. She couldn't afford to slip up one wrong move, and everything could fall apart. When she arrived at the hotel, she went through the motions of her evening routine, trying to appear as normal as possible. She ordered room service, answered a few work emails, and even called Dami to check in. But beneath the surface, her mind was elsewhere, focused on the impending confrontation. As night fell, the city outside her window seemed to take on a different character. The lights of the buildings glowed like watchful eyes, and the shadows in her room seemed to stretch and deepen. The hotel, once a place of refuge, now felt like a cage, one where she was waiting for the inevitable showdown. Just after 10, there was a knock at her door. Muna's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm. She crossed the room and opened the door to find Chidi standing there, a small black case in his hand. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, stepping inside. Muna nodded, closing the door behind him. "As ready as I'll ever be." Chidi set the case on the bed and opened it, revealing a tiny recording device no larger than a button. "This is the MIC, he explained, holding it up. "It'll pick up everything around you. I'll be recording remotely, so you don't have to worry about that. Just focus on getting Sadiq to talk, try to keep him calm, but steer the conversation toward his obsession with you. We need him to slip, to say something incriminating." Muna swallowed hard, nodding as she took the device. "And if he doesn't? Then we keep trying," Chidi said, his voice firm. "But we'll get him, Muna. He's too confident, too sure of himself. That'll be his downfall." They spent the next hour going over the plan in detail. Chidi coached her on how to keep her nerves in check, how to steer the conversation without raising suspicion. By the time they were done, Muna felt a strange mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. As Chidi prepared to leave, he paused, looking at her with a seriousness that made her heart skip. "Muna, I know this is terrifying. But remember, you're not alone in this. I'm right here with you, every step of the way." She managed a small, tense smile. "Thank you, Chidi. I just hope this works." "It will," he said with quiet confidence. "We'll make sure of it." After Chidi left, Muna sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the recording device in her hand. The reality of what she was about to do hit her like a wave. She was about to confront Sadiq, to face the darkness that had been stalking her from the shadows. But this time, she wouldn't be running. This time, she would be fighting back. With a deep breath, she clipped the tiny device to the inside of her blouse, ensuring it was hidden from view. She checked herself in the mirror, making sure she looked calm and composed, then picked up her phone. It was time to make the call. The phone rang twice before Sadiq picked up. His voice was smooth, almost too friendly. "Muna, I was hoping you'd call. I think we need to talk," Muna said, keeping her voice steady. "Can you meet me at the hotel bar? I have something I need to say." There was a brief pause, and she could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind. "Of course," he finally said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As she hung up the phone, Muna felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She was about to walk into the lion's den, but there was no turning back now. This was it, the moment everything would change. Muna sat at the hotel bar, her fingers tapping nervously on the polished wood surface. The dim lighting and quiet atmosphere provided a stark contrast to the tension building inside her. She tried to focus on her breathing, to stay calm, but every second that passed felt like an eternity. Then she saw him, Sadiq. He walked into the bar with the same confident stride she had once found charming. But now, that confidence seemed menacing, like a predator closing in on its prey. He spotted her immediately and made his way over, his smile calculated and cold. "Muna," Sadiq said smoothly as he slid into the seat across from her. "You look beautiful tonight." "Thanks," Muna replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I wanted to talk to you about everything that's been going on." Sadiq's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of suspicion creeping into his expression. "Everything? That's a bit vague, don't you think?" Muna took a deep breath, remembering Chidi's advice. She needed to stay in control, to guide the conversation without letting Sadiq sense her fear. "You've been acting differently lately," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I've noticed how you've been trying to protect me. It's almost like you're obsessed with keeping me safe." Sadiq's smile faltered for just a moment before he quickly recovered. "I care about you, Muna. Is that such a crime? I only want what's best for you." "But why?" Muna pressed, leaning in slightly. "Why are you so focused on me? It's like you're always watching, always waiting for something to go wrong." Sadiq's eyes darkened, and Muna could feel the tension rising between them. "I've seen how the world can hurt people like you," he said quietly, his tone almost threatening. "Innocent, naive women who don't know how dangerous things can be. I'm just making sure you don't get hurt." Muna's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the opening she needed. "And what would happen if I tried to leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I didn't want your protection anymore?" Sadiq's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he stared at her. "You don't know what you're talking about, Muna," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've kept you safe this long, haven't I? You need me, whether you realize it or not." Muna's pulse quickened as she sensed the shift in Sadiq's demeanor. He was growing agitated, his carefully maintained facade slipping. She needed to push him further, to make him reveal the true extent of his obsession. "But I don't need you, Sadiq," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can take care of myself. I'm not afraid of the world, and I'm not afraid of you." For a moment, the two of them sat in silence, the air between them thick with tension. Then, without warning, Sadiq reached across the table and grabbed Muna's wrist, his grip tight and painful. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, his eyes flashing with anger. "I've sacrificed everything to protect you, and this is how you repay me. By trying to run away." Muna fought the urge to recoil, forcing herself to stay calm even as panic surged through her. "Let go of me, Sadiq," she said, her voice trembling. You're hurting me. But Sadiq didn't release his grip. Instead, he leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. You don't get to decide when this ends, Muna. I do. And if you think you can just walk away from me, you're wrong. I won't let you. At that moment, the door to the bar swung open, and Chidi entered, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Muna and Sadiq. He moved quickly, making his way toward them with purpose. Sadiq, let her go, Chidi said, his voice calm but authoritative. Sadiq turned to face Chidi, his expression a mix of surprise and anger. Who the hell are you? He demanded, still holding tightly to Muna's wrist. I'm someone who knows exactly who you are, Chidi replied, his eyes narrowing. And I've got more than enough evidence to make sure you never hurt anyone again. Sadiq's face twisted with rage, and for a moment, Muna thought he might lash out at Chidi. But then, just as quickly as his anger had flared, it vanished. He released Muna's wrist and stood up, smoothing his shirt as if nothing had happened. You don't know what you're talking about, Sadiq said coldly. Muna and I have a special bond, she needs me. No, she doesn't, Chidi said firmly, stepping between Sadiq and Muna. And if you come near her again, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Sadiq stared at Chidi, his eyes filled with loathing. But he seemed to realize that he was outmatched. With a final, disdainful glance at Muna, he turned and walked out of the bar, disappearing into the night. As soon as he was gone, Chidi turned to Muna, concern etched on his face. Are you okay? Muna nodded, though she felt anything but okay. Her wrist throbbed where Sadiq had grabbed her, and her entire body was shaking with the aftermath of the encounter. But she had done it, she had confronted Sadiq, and now, with Chidi's help, she would be free of him for good. I'm fine, she said, her voice wavering slightly. Thank you, Chidi. I don't know what I would have done without you. Chidi gave her a small, reassuring smile. You were amazing, Muna. You stood up to him, you were stronger than he ever gave you credit for. Muna managed a weak smile in return, though her mind was still racing. The nightmare with Sadiq wasn't over yet, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Let's get out of here, Chidi suggested, gently guiding her toward the exit. We've got a lot to discuss, and we need to figure out the next steps. As they left the bar and stepped into the cool night air, Muna felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had faced the shadows in the dark, and though the path ahead was still uncertain, she knew she wasn't alone. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Chidi worked tirelessly to compile the evidence against Sadiq, contacting his sources and gathering every piece of incriminating information he could find. Meanwhile, Muna tried to resume some semblance of normalcy, though she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She met with Chidi regularly, going over the details of their plan. They decided to approach the police with the evidence they had gathered, hoping that it would be enough to get Sadiq out of her life once and for all. But as the days passed, Muna couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows. Sadiq might have backed off for now, but she knew he wasn't the type to give up easily. The tension gnawed at her, even as she tried to focus on the task at hand. One evening, after another long day of planning with Chidi, Muna returned to her hotel room and found a note slipped under the door. Her heart skipped a beat as she bent down to pick it up, her hands trembling. The note was short and to the point. You can't hide forever, Muna. I'll be waiting. Muna's blood ran cold as she read the words. It was unmistakably from Sadiq. He wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. The note was a chilling reminder that he was still out there, watching her every move. She immediately called Chidi, her voice shaking as she told him about the note. He arrived at her room within minutes, his expression grim as he examined the message. This is his way of trying to intimidate you, Chidi said, his voice calm but firm. He wants you to be scared, to feel like you can't escape him. Well, it's working, Muna admitted, sinking onto the edge of the bed. What are we supposed to do now? We stick to the plan, Chidi replied, his eyes filled with determination. We take this note to the police, along with everything else we've gathered. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need to show them that Sadiq is a serious threat. Muna, though the fear still gnawed at her. And what if the police don't do anything? What if he gets away with it? Chidi sat down beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I won't let that happen, Muna. We've come too far to let him win now. Despite his words, Muna couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The note was a stark reminder that Sadiq wasn't going to give up without a fight. And the closer they got to bringing him down, the more dangerous he would become. The next morning, Muna and Chidi went to the police with their evidence. They presented everything, recordings of Sadiq's threats, details of his obsessive behavior, and the note he had left under her door. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions, but Muna couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't taking her seriously enough. We'll look into this, the lead detective assured them, but there was a hint of doubt in his voice that made Muna's stomach churn. Chidi sensed her unease and quickly stepped in. Detective, with all due respect, this isn't something that can wait. Sadiq is dangerous. We've seen what he's capable of, and Muna's life is at risk. The detective leaned back in his chair, considering Chidi's words. He glanced at the evidence laid out on the table before him, photos, recordings, the ominous note. Finally, he nodded. We'll increase patrols around the hotel and put out an alert for Sadiq. But you need to understand that we can only do so much until he makes a direct move. Muna's heart sank. They had done everything they could, but it still didn't feel like enough. Sadiq was a step ahead of them, always lurking in the shadows, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. As they left the police station, Chidi turned to Muna, his expression determined. We're not going to wait around for Sadiq to make the first move. We need to take matters into our own hands. What do you mean? Muna asked, her anxiety mounting. I have a plan, Chidi said, his voice steady. But it's risky. We need to draw Sadiq out, make him think he's in control, that he's won. Then, we'll be ready for him. Muna swallowed hard. The idea of confronting Sadiq again terrified her, but she knew Chidi was right. They couldn't keep living in fear, waiting for Sadiq to strike. They had to take control of the situation. I'm in, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Whatever it takes, I'm ready. Chidi gave her a reassuring nod. We'll end this, Muna. I promise. That night, they put their plan into motion. Muna returned to her hotel room, acting as if everything was normal. She made sure to leave her curtains open and her lights on, creating the appearance that she was vulnerable and unaware. Meanwhile, Chidi stayed close by, watching from a distance. He had alerted a few trusted contacts in law enforcement who were on standby, ready to move at a moment's notice. As the hours ticked by, Muna's anxiety grew. Every creak, every shadow made her heart race. She knew Sadiq was out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, just after midnight, she heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest as she strained to listen. The doorknob jiggled slightly, followed by the soft click of a lock being picked. Muna's breath caught in her throat. This was it. Sadiq was here. The door slowly creaked open, and Sadiq stepped inside. He moved quietly, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of Muna. She could see the cold determination in his expression, the madness that had taken hold of him. He truly believed he had won, that he had her right where he wanted her. But Muna wasn't going to let him win. She waited until Sadiq was fully inside the room before stepping out of the shadows. Looking for me, she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. Sadiq spun around, surprise flashing across his face. Muna, he breathed, his tone laced with both relief and something more sinister. I knew you couldn't stay away. Muna took a step back, trying to keep the distance between them. It's over, Sadiq. The police know everything. You won't get away with this. Sadiq's expression twisted with anger, and he took a step toward her. You think you can stop me? You think they can protect you? You're mine, Muna. You've always been mine. Before Sadiq could close the gap, the door burst open, and Chidi stormed in, followed by 2 plainclothes officers. Step away from her, Sadiq. Chidi ordered, his voice commanding. Sadiq hesitated, his eyes darting between Chidi and Muna. For a moment, it looked like he might try to fight, but then he slowly raised his hands in surrender, a bitter smile curling his lips. You think you've won, Sadiq sneered, his voice dripping with malice. But this isn't over. You'll never be safe, Muna. Never. The officers quickly moved in, restraining Sadiq and pulling him out of the room. Muna watched as he was led away, her heart still pounding with the adrenaline of the encounter. It was over. Finally, it was over. Chidi approached her. You did it, Muna. It's finished. But Muna could barely register his words. She felt a wave of emotion crash over her, relief, fear, exhaustion. It was all too much. Chidi gently guided her to the bed, sitting beside her as she tried to process everything that had happened. You're safe now, he said softly. Sadiq won't hurt you again. Muna nodded, though the tears that welled up in her eyes told a different story. She had been through so much, too much. But as she looked at Chidi, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe now, she could finally start to heal. In the days that followed Sadiq's arrest, life slowly began to return to normal for Muna. The police investigation wrapped up quickly, with Sadiq facing multiple charges that would ensure he spent a long time behind bars. Muna moved out of the hotel and found a new apartment in a different part of the city. It was a small but cozy place, filled with light and warmth, everything she needed to start fresh. Dami was a constant presence in her life, offering support and encouragement as Muna navigated the aftermath of her ordeal. They spent hours talking, laughing, and making plans for the future, things Muna hadn't been able to do for so long. But it was Chidi who became her rock. He was there for her every step of the way, helping her move, offering advice, and simply being there when she needed someone to talk to. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Muna found herself opening up to him in ways she never had before. One evening, a few weeks after Sadiq's arrest, Chidi took Muna out to dinner at a small, intimate restaurant. As they sat across from each other, sipping wine and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere, Muna realized just how much her life had changed. You seem happy, Chidi observed, smiling at her from across the table. I am, Muna admitted, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, I feel free. Chidi reached across the table, taking her hand in his. You deserve to be happy, Muna. After everything you've been through, you deserve the world. Muna looked into his eyes, feeling a connection that went beyond words. I couldn't have done it without you, Chidi. You saved me. Chidi shook his head, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. You saved yourself, Muna. You were stronger than you ever knew. I just helped you see it. Tears welled up in Muna's eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude, of hope. She had been through so much, survived so much. And now, she was ready to embrace the future, to leave the shadows behind. As the night went on, Muna and Chidi talked and laughed, sharing stories and dreams for the future. There was no more fear, no more darkness, only the light of possibility. And as they walked hand in hand through the city streets, Muna knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter in her life, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of something truly beautiful. Months passed, and the scars of Muna's past slowly began to heal. She focused on her work, her friendships, and her blossoming relationship with Chidi. The nightmares that had plagued her for so long started to fade, replaced by dreams of a brighter future. Sadiq was a distant memory, a shadow that had been banished by the light of her new life. The court proceedings had been swift, and Sadiq had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Muna had chosen not to attend the trial. She didn't need to see him again. She was ready to move on. Chidi had become an integral part of her life, a steady presence who brought her comfort and joy. They spent their days exploring the city, planning trips, and simply enjoying each other's company. What had started as a friendship forged in the crucible of danger had blossomed into something deep and enduring. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Muna's new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Chidi turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Muna," he began, his voice gentle, "I know we've both been through a lot, but I have to say, I've never felt this way about anyone before. You mean the world to me." Muna's heart swelled with emotion as she gazed into his eyes. "Chidi, I feel the same way. You've been my rock, my guide through the darkness. I don't know where I'd be without you." Chidi smiled, his eyes shining with affection. "I don't want to imagine a life without you in it. I want us to build something together, something lasting and beautiful. I want to be with you, Muna, now and always." Muna's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and disbelief. The past months had been a journey of healing and rediscovery, and Chidi had been by her side through it all. The thought of a future with him, free from the shadows that once consumed her, felt like a dream come true. With tears of happiness glistening in her eyes, she took his hand in hers. "Chidi, I've never felt so certain about anything in my life. I've been through so much, and through it all, you've been my light. I want the same future with you, a future where we can be ourselves, free from fear." Chidi's smile widened as he gently lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her fingers. "Then let's make that future a reality."